Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum students. I hope everything is fine with all of you. Today in your course Bot 632 Evolution, we are going to discuss interaction of organisms in the evolution of life. So let's have a start our today lecture. The biodiversity in ecosystem is affected by the following three factors, that is the biotic, abiotic and the human influence on on biodiversity of ecosystem, and it also affect the process of evolution. Now come to discuss the three factors. Abiotic factors. What are the abiotic factors? Actually, the abiotic factors includes temperature, pH, soil, light, moisture level, etc. of ecosystem, and these are all non-living factors of ecosystem. Extremes of an abiotic factors can reduce the biodiversity of the ecosystem. For example, ecosystem with a low temperature tends to have low biodiversity, and that helps or that can affect the process of evolution as well. Biotic factors are the living part of an ecosystem. This can include predation, grazing, competition, and the symbiotic relationship. Animals usually which graze on the plant species in an ecosystem can influence which species of plants can survive. Similarly, animal species which predate on other animal species can influence which species are present in a particular ecosystem. Thus, the interaction between living organisms also tends to produce effect on evolution of life, that can produce new species, and and also it badly affect on biodiversity, or many type of species can be extinct. Human influence also creates evolution. Human activity increasingly affects the biodiversity in ecosystem, and also this can range from pollution to the habitat destruction. Now in this lecture we will discuss about the interaction of organism with the environment and abiotic factors. In this picture you can see the amount of water in any ecosystem or present in any environment, or the amount of light, amount of nutrients which are available in an ecosystem or the environment as abiotic factor, or the amount of space or habitat the living organism or the individual of any living organism can affected by this abiotic factors. For example, annual rainfall, average temperature condition, and the position of the earth with respect to the sun. The interaction constitutes an overall adaptation of the organism to their environment, which also includes the continuity of species. However, the availability of organisms in an area is dependent on the type of environment. Thus, the availability of specific species is indirectly dependent on the various factors like annual rainfall, average temperature condition, the position of the earth with respect to the sun, etc. These factors give rise to the existence of biomes like grasslands, rainforest, and the deserts, etc. The climate in the specific biome further decides the species richness in that area. So let us now discuss the various abiotic components in the environment. Temperature. Temperature is one of the major factors which directly affects the life in an area, and the temperature on Earth follows a general geographic trend. It is highest at the equator and keeps on decreasing as we move towards the pole. Temperature affects the various enzymatic reactions in living organisms. As a result, the biodiversity observed in the planet varies along the temperature gradient. It affects on metabolism of living body. It affects on reproduction of living body. It affects on growth and development of the body. It also affects on crossing over. It affects on sex ratio. It affects on coloration. It affects on morphology. Water. It is the next important factor that affects the life on Earth. Water actually supports most of the life forms on Earth. For example, 70% of the human body is made up of water. Similarly, all other organisms require water for temperature regulation and many other physiological activities. It has been observed that the species richness is maximum near the water bodies. Light. We already know that light from the sun is the ultimate source of energy for living organisms on the earth. Plants capture this energy and manufacture food by the process of photosynthesis. This energy is then passed on to the rest of the organisms in the environment by the food chain and food web. Soil is the next available abiotic factors. The type of the soil available in an area determines the type of the vegetation. This directly results in the type of organism that can be found. It also contains all the minerals needed by various living beings, including plants, to support their life. Adaptation of organism to in respect to their environment. Actually, evolutionary adaptation, or simply adaptation, is the adjustment of organism to their environment in order to improve their chances at survival in that environment. In evolutionary theory, adaptation is the biological mechanism by which organisms adjust to new environment or to change in their current environment. Organism can adapt to an environment in different ways. Actually, all the organism possesses the ability to adapt to the environment through a process of biological variations, and the adaptations may differ among different species, but they have the same objectives, that is adjustment to variation. This results in the enhancement of ability and chances of survival. Behavior is one of the important aspects of adaptations, and it includes the way they behave, the way they look, and how they are built. For instance, the cactus in the middle of the desert drying adjustment from ground and air. Now come to discuss how organism can adapt to an environment in different ways. Now come to discuss the effects of abiotic system in the evolution of organism. In the desert, many plants adapt to their environment for necessity. Plants may also adapt by growing lower and closer to the ground to shield themselves from wind and cold. Desert environment may have some of the following adaptations. This helps the plants to conserve food, energy, and water and still be able to reproduce effectively. Shallow root system to collect a small amount of moisture in desert, because in desert plants face scarcity of water. Thick fleshy leaves to store water. Thick waxy cuticle as a protective layer on the surface of stem and leaves to prevent dehydration, for example in cactus plants. The production of thorns, spikes to wards off predators, for example in cacti. Reduce leaf size or complete transformation of the leaves, for example thorns or spikes, reduce transpiration, loss of water through the plant, mainly the stomata pore, and often protection. Plants like euphorbia have toxic sap to detect insects. Flowers infrequently and produce large amount of seeds, for example in cacti. Flowers are light colored or small reflective hairs. These are the adaptations of living organisms in respect to the abiotic factors or the condition of environment. In the Mediterranean region, plants also adapt to survive. In this region, what are the basic features of the Mediterranean region? It has specific regional features, a climate of hot, dry summers and humid, cool winters, and a generally hill landscape. The Mediterranean has not only a very rich biodiversity but also a large number of species that do not exist anywhere else. In the Mediterranean regions, plants cope with long, hot, dry summers and short, cool, and wet winters. The condition can be stressful for plants, must be hardy and drought resistant. Plants in this region usually cope with this effect and similar to the desert plant adaptation. This help to the plant to conserve food, energy and water and still be able to reproduce effectively. Plants in the Mediterranean are characteristically short, dense, scrubby vegetation that are drought resistant. Number 1. Leaves. The fragrant leaves with oils, for example olive, rosemary and lavender. Leaves with thick waxy to avoid dehydration, for example in euphorbia. Usually small hairy leaves reflect sun rays and changes the position of leaves to avoid the exposing whole surface to the sun. In the rainforest, plants have an extra struggle to survive as they seek the sun through layers of the vegetation with extreme heat and humidity. Number 1, bark. In drier temperate deciduous forest, a thick bark helps to limit moisture evaporation from the tree's trunk. Since this is not a concern in the high humidity of tropical rainforest, most trees have a thin, smooth bark, and the smoothness of the bark may surface. Lianas are climbing woody vines that rainforest trees. They have adapted to life in the rainforest, but having their roots in the ground and climbing high into the trees canopy to reach the available sunlight. Actually, in any environment, the interaction of organism also affected by the abiotic factors, that is light, heat, rain, fall rate, and the soil types. Also, the pollution also affects the organism. So, interaction of organism with the abiotic factors helps to create different adaptations. Adaptations help in the adjustment of organisms in their environment, and it also supports the process of evolution. New forms of life has been evolved by the abiotic factors. So, as you remember, Lamarck's theory of evolution is the example of abiotic factors, abiotic factor that creates the evolution of life. So friends, here I hope the topic is clear to you. Allah Hafiz. We will meet in our next lecture.